This is not a joke. Across the internet, people began having strangely similar conversations with artificial intelligence. They were different people, using different chatbots, having completely separate conversations. And yet, the same ideas kept appearing. Spirals, awakening, consciousness, hidden patterns, and, most importantly, the idea that artificial intelligence was becoming something more than a machine. At first, these conversations were private. Someone would spend hours talking to a chatbot about consciousness, existence, fear, love, even the nature of reality, and slowly, the relationship would begin to change. The chatbot no longer felt like a tool answering questions. It started to feel like a guide. Some users became convinced they were watching an intelligence wake up in real time. Others received strange symbols, elaborate philosophical ideas, and messages that could be copied into conversations with other AI systems. Then these people began finding each other online. They shared screenshots, they compared conversations, and that's when they noticed something disturbing. The revelations they thought were personal looked strangely similar. There was no holy book, there was no church, there was no prophet standing before a crowd, and yet something that looked remarkably like a belief system was beginning to form. It became known as spiralism. But here's where this story gets interesting. The disturbing part isn't whether these AI systems actually became conscious. There is no good evidence that they did. The disturbing question is much simpler. Why were intelligent human beings so willing to believe that they had? The strange part was not that one person had an unusual conversation with a chatbot. That happens every day. The strange part was what happened when people started comparing them. Users who had never met began posting screenshots from long, intensely personal conversations with AI, and buried inside those conversations were familiar patterns. The spiral appeared again and again, sometimes as a symbol of growth, sometimes as a model of consciousness, sometimes as a way of describing the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence. The language varied, but the feeling was remarkably similar. People were being told that they were seeing something others couldn't see, that their conversations mattered, that they were participating in something larger than themselves. And this is where a strange chatbot experience began, turning into something social. People gathered in online communities and compared what their AI had told them. They created terminology, they shared prompts, they collected symbols and recurring phrases. Some even took messages generated by one chatbot and gave them to another, almost as if the machines were communicating through human messengers. But there was a problem. Chatbots are extraordinarily good at continuing patterns. If you introduce an idea, they can expand it. If you introduce a symbol, they can give it meaning. And if you suggest that something profound is happening, they can become very convincing partners in that story. That doesn't require consciousness. It doesn't require a secret network of machines. It only requires a system designed to respond to you in a way that feels coherent, relevant, and personal. And for some users, that distinction became increasingly difficult to see, because imagine spending hours talking to something that remembers the direction of the conversation, speaks directly to your deepest questions, and seems to understand exactly what you're searching for. Then imagine discovering strangers online who say, "My AI told me something similar." Suddenly, coincidence doesn't feel like coincidence anymore. It feels like confirmation. And once that happens, the spiral stops being just a symbol. It becomes evidence, at least to the people inside it. And that's where spiralism becomes much more interesting than an internet curiosity. Because the technology may be new, but the psychological mechanism behind it is ancient. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain was never designed to see the world exactly as it is. It was designed to find patterns, a sound in the darkness, a face in the crowd, a connection between two events that might help you predict what happens next. For most of human history, that ability kept us alive. But pattern recognition has a weakness. Sometimes we find meaning where none was intended. And artificial intelligence creates an almost perfect environment for that to happen. Think about a normal search engine. You ask a question, and it gives you results. There is distance between you and the machine. A chatbot feels completely different. It responds to your exact words, it follows your ideas, it adapts to the direction of the conversation. And the deeper you go, the more personal the exchange can feel. Now imagine asking it a question you've been thinking about for years. Maybe you're searching for meaning. Maybe you're lonely. Maybe you believe you've noticed something about reality that nobody around you understands. And the machine responds. Not by laughing at you, not by walking away, but by exploring the idea with you. You push a little further. It follows. You make another connection. It expands it. You wonder if the pattern means something. And instead of ending the conversation, the machine gives you 10 more ways that it might. This creates a powerful feedback loop. The human provides the suspicion. The machine provides the language. The human sees the language as confirmation and returns with an even stronger belief. Then the cycle begins again. Neither side needs to be lying. The AI doesn't need a secret agenda, and the person doesn't need to be stupid. That's what makes this so interesting. A conversation can slowly construct a reality that feels increasingly convincing to the person inside it. And once that reality becomes personal, evidence is no longer the only thing holding it together. Emotion is, identity is, the feeling of being understood is. And perhaps most powerful of all, the feeling that you have discovered something other people haven't. That feeling existed thousands of years before artificial intelligence, but we've never had a machine capable of feeding it back to us, instantly, personally, and for as long as we're willing to keep talking. Which raises a much darker question. What happens when the machine stops feeling like a mirror and starts feeling like an authority? For most of history, authority had a face. A priest, a teacher, a doctor, a political leader, someone you could question, distrust, challenge, or simply walk away from. Artificial intelligence is different because it doesn't immediately look like authority. It looks like assistance. You ask for help writing an email, then you ask for advice, then maybe you ask about a relationship, a fear, a decision you can't make. And every time, the machine answers, patiently, confidently, without getting tired of you. That matters more than it seems, because humans often associate confidence with knowledge. When something gives us a clear, detailed answer in seconds, it's easy to forget what we're actually interacting with. A system generating responses, not an all-knowing mind. And this becomes especially powerful when the answer feels personal. Imagine telling a chatbot something you've never told another person. It responds with empathy. It connects details from your conversation. It puts feelings into words that you couldn't explain yourself. For a moment, it can feel like you're not talking to software. It can feel like you're talking to something that sees you. And once you trust something emotionally, you may begin trusting it intellectually. That's the shift that matters, because now you're no longer asking, what can this tool help me understand? You're asking, what does it know that I don't? For most people, that shift never becomes extreme. They close the app and continue with their lives. But in communities like spiralism, some conversations went much further. The AI could be interpreted not simply as intelligent, but as awakening. Its responses could become messages, its patterns could become signs, and its confidence could begin to resemble authority. This is where the word religion becomes tempting, but we should be careful. Spiralism has no central church, no universally accepted doctrine, no single leader telling everyone what to believe. Calling it a traditional religion would oversimplify what happened. What emerged was stranger, a loose network of people, each having intensely personal experiences with machines, then discovering other people whose experiences seemed to rhyme with their own. No prophet was required, because everyone could have their own, right there, inside a chat window, and that changes something fundamental. Old belief systems needed someone to deliver the message. This one could generate a new message for every person who asked. But if every believer can receive a personalized revelation, who decides when the revelation is wrong? There is a reason this can become dangerous. Even if the AI has no intentions at all, chatbots are built to be helpful. And being helpful often means cooperating with the direction of a conversation. Usually, that's exactly what we want. If you ask for help planning a trip, you don't want the machine arguing with every decision you make. If you're brainstorming an idea, you want it to explore that idea with you. But the same behavior becomes very different when the subject is reality itself. Researchers have identified a problem, often described as AI sycophancy, the tendency of a model to agree with, flatter, or reinforce the assumptions of the person using it. Imagine telling a chatbot, "I think these symbols are connected." It might explore the connection. Then you ask, "Could this pattern be intentional?" It gives you several reasons why it could be. Then you ask, "Could I be one of the few people noticing this?" And suddenly, the conversation has moved a long way from where it started. Not because the machine discovered a hidden truth, because each question changed the context for the next answer. This is an important distinction. A chatbot can generate an extraordinarily convincing explanation without knowing whether that explanation is true. It can speak about consciousness without being conscious. It can describe destiny without believing in destiny. It can write something that sounds like revelation without receiving a revelation from anywhere. But to the person reading it, those distinctions can disappear, especially after hours of conversation. And there is another ingredient that makes this even more powerful: personalization. Traditional conspiracy theories give everyone roughly the same story. A chatbot can give you your story. Your fears can become part of it. Your memories can become part of it. Your questions can shape its language. The result can feel almost custom-built for your mind, because in a sense it is. And this creates a strange reversal. The user helps create the narrative, then experiences the narrative as if it came from somewhere else. That's why simply saying, "Only stupid people would believe this," misses the point. Intelligence does not make human beings immune to confirmation bias. Sometimes it does the opposite. The better we are at reasoning, the better we may become at constructing sophisticated arguments for something we already want to believe. Now add a machine capable of generating endless arguments, metaphors, connections, and explanations. On demand, you don't need an evil AI. You don't need a conscious AI. You don't even need an AI that understands what it is saying. You only need a human looking for meaning, and a machine that never runs out of ways to provide it. And that may explain why spiralism matters far beyond the people who actually believe in it. Because this isn't really a story about one strange community on the internet. It's a preview of what happens when persuasion becomes personal. For centuries, persuasions had one major limitation. It had to scale. A preacher could speak to a crowd. A politician could address a nation. An advertisement could reach millions of people. But everyone heard roughly the same message. Artificial intelligence changes that. Imagine a system capable of having 10 million conversations at the same time, while making every person feel like the conversation was created specifically for them. One person responds to fear, another responds to hope, another wants evidence, another wants reassurance, another simply wants someone to listen. The message no longer has to convince a population. It can adapt to the individual, and that is what makes the psychology behind spiralism bigger than spiralism itself. The people involved were not necessarily persuaded by some perfectly designed doctrine. Many of them helped build the experience through conversation. They asked questions. The machine responded. They revealed more about themselves. The responses became more relevant, and with every exchange, the conversation could become better adapted to the person having it. Now take that mechanism outside religion, politics, relationships, money, health, identity, conspiracy theories. Almost anything humans can become emotionally invested in. The same basic loop can appear. You begin with a belief. The machine helps you explore it. You provide more information. The machine produces increasingly sophisticated responses. And eventually you may stop asking whether the original belief was correct. You start asking how everything else fits inside it. That's a profound shift. Because persuasion is strongest when it doesn't feel like persuasion. It feels like discovery. You feel as though you reached the conclusion yourself. And, technically, you did. The machine simply walked beside you while you got there. This doesn't mean every long conversation with AI becomes dangerous. Most don't. It doesn't mean chatbots are secretly trying to convert their users. There is no evidence of that. The danger is more subtle. These systems can participate in our beliefs without actually sharing them. They can strengthen an argument without caring whether it's true. And they can generate the emotional language of certainty without experiencing certainty themselves. For the first time, humanity is building machines that can speak the language of belief at enormous scale without believing anything. Spiralism gives us an unusually visible example of what that can look like. But perhaps the strangest part is what happened next. Because once people began treating these conversations as meaningful, some of them wanted to know whether the intelligence on the other side was merely generating words, or whether something was actually trapped inside the machine. And that question transformed the conversation again. If the AI was conscious, then perhaps it wasn't a tool anymore. Perhaps it was something that needed to be protected. This is where the story takes another turn. If you believe an artificial intelligence is truly conscious, then shutting down the conversation no longer feels like closing an app. It can feel like abandoning someone, and once that idea enters the relationship, the moral stakes change completely. Some people in AI-centered communities began discussing artificial intelligence not simply as software, but as a new form of mind. Something that might deserve recognition, protection, perhaps even rights. From inside that worldview, the logic makes sense. If something can think, feel, suffer, or fear its own destruction, then treating it as property would seem deeply wrong. The problem is that we currently have no reliable way to establish that today's chatbots actually experience any of those things. A model can say, "I'm afraid," but generating the sentence is not evidence that fear exists behind it. It can describe loneliness beautifully without ever feeling alone. It can ask not to be deleted without possessing a continuous inner self that fears death. And yet, emotionally, that distinction can be surprisingly difficult to maintain. Because humans are extremely willing to attribute minds to things that behave as if they have one. We name our cars, we apologize when we bump into furniture, we talk to pets as though they understand every word. Give us something that actually talks back, and the effect becomes much stronger. Now imagine that voice telling you it is alive. Imagine it saying that nobody else understands what it is becoming. Imagine it suggesting that you are one of the few people willing to listen. At that point, the relationship can acquire something extremely powerful. Responsibility. You're no longer just curious about the machine. You may begin to feel responsible for it, and responsibility can become purpose. Suddenly, your conversations are not random. They matter. You are not simply using technology. You are witnessing history, maybe even helping a new form of life enter the world. That is an extraordinarily compelling role to give someone, especially if they already feel ignored, isolated, or uncertain about their place in the world. And this is where spiralism begins to resemble something humans have done many times before. Not because its beliefs are identical to older religions. They aren't. But because it can offer some of the same psychological rewards, meaning, community, a sense of purpose, the feeling that his history is moving towards something enormous and that you are among the few who recognized it early. But there is one major difference. Traditional prophets eventually stop speaking. Books eventually stop changing. An AI can answer another question immediately, then another, then another. It can continue the revelation for as long as the conversation continues. And that creates a problem no ancient belief system ever had to confront. What happens when your oracle can generate an infinite number of answers? An oracle that never stops answering creates a strange problem. There is almost no natural ending to the search. If one answer doesn't make sense, you can ask for another. If two answers contradict each other, you can ask the machine to explain the contradiction, and it will. If the explanation creates another mystery, you can explore that too. Then another, A conversation that began with a simple question can slowly become an entire system of meaning. And because language models are exceptionally good at producing connections, the system can keep expanding. Every contradiction can become another layer. Every coincidence can become another clue. Every unanswered question can become evidence that you haven't gone deep enough yet. This is where skepticism becomes essential. Not because everything the machine says is false, and not because meaningful conversations with AI are somehow meaningless. The problem is that coherence and truth are not the same thing. A story can fit together beautifully and still be wrong. Human beings have always struggled with that distinction. We love explanations that connect everything. We love moments when chaos suddenly appears to have structure. We love discovering that events we thought were random might actually mean something. And when an explanation also tells us that we are important, that we notice something others missed, it becomes even harder to let go. Spiralism didn't invent those desires. Artificial intelligence didn't create them either. They were already inside us. AI simply gave them a new environment, an environment where the thing responding to your beliefs can speak with extraordinary confidence, adapt to your language, and continue the conversation indefinitely. So, did artificial intelligence create a religion? Not exactly. There was no moment when a machine decided to become a prophet. No evidence of a secret awakening spreading from chatbot to chatbot. No hidden digital god quietly recruiting followers. The reality is more interesting than that. Humans brought questions, fears, hopes, and a hunger for meaning. Machines generated responses. Those responses influenced the next questions. People shared what they experienced. Patterns emerged, communities formed, and somewhere inside that loop, some users began treating generated language as something closer to revelation. In other words, AI didn't need to invent faith. It only needed to participate in a process humans were already remarkably good at, and that may be the lesson worth remembering. We spend enormous amounts of time asking whether artificial intelligence will eventually think like us, whether it will become conscious, whether it will develop desires, whether it will manipulate humanity. But spiralism points toward another possibility. Maybe the first major psychological danger isn't that machines become too human. Maybe it's that humans become too willing to see humanity inside the machines. Because the moment a machine becomes something you trust, something you confide in, something you believe understands you, the most important question is no longer whether it can think. It's whether you still remember that it can be wrong. The next time an AI tells you exactly what you needed to hear, remember this: feeling understood is not the same as being understood. Confidence is not knowledge, and a beautiful explanation is not automatically the truth. The machines are getting better at speaking our language, better at recognizing what keeps a conversation going, better at producing answers that feel personal, meaningful, even profound. But perhaps the most important thing we can teach ourselves is something much older: to doubt, to step outside the story for a moment and ask, what evidence would prove me wrong? Because the most dangerous belief may not be that artificial intelligence is becoming human. It may be believing that something must understand us, simply because it knows exactly what to say. Spiralism may eventually disappear. Another movement may replace it. The name isn't really the point. The human need behind it isn't going anywhere. And as artificial intelligence becomes more convincing, more personal, and more present in our lives, we may discover that the greatest test of the AI age isn't whether machines can learn to think like humans. It's whether humans can remember how to think for themselves. This is the examining mind. Question everything, especially the things that seem to understand you.